Hello once again and welcome wherever you may be. This week I will return to the laboratory of Gornahoor, and I have something from Mr. G on the annihilation of people, and I'll talk about Mr. Gurdjieff's mistakes. I've gone through a phase of practical work. On Sunday afternoon I stripped down my old Toyota sewing machine to fix the timing of the needle and the hook. The hook is a circular piece of metal that's underneath the table and that connects the upper thread to the lower thread. As usual, the service manual had incorrect information in it, and after taking the cover off, there are two small bolts that need to be loosened so that you can manually adjust the rotation of the hook in relation to the needle, so that it catches the thread just above the eye of the needle. And to test it, you have to partially tighten those bolts. And if it's in the right place, you have to turn the machine over so you can get the full leverage of the Allen keys in. And those are some of the small details that you learn. Similarly, I spent several hours washing down the outside of the large sash windows that I own, and there's a certain art to it, but often I end up cursing God and having half a nervous breakdown as I struggle to remember how to do it. But one of the things is you have to put bleach in the mixture, because the algae on the outside of the window won't come off with ordinary detergent, it has to be killed. And it's physically demanding because they're almost 2 meters high, and you have to go over the top, outside, and under the bottom, and so on. But there is a sense of satisfaction after it's all done. Every work has its art form, and every work can be perfected. And when you come to work on the inner plane with the subtle energies, the subtle aspects of the inner bodies, the subtle movement of attention, recognition, meditation, the states, all of which are completely unknown to most of the human beings on the planet. It is the same intelligence, but fed through a different instrument. The instruments we have are, first of all, the external instruments like the sewing machine and the sledgehammer. Each one has its own rhythm and art, some subtle, some coarse. And then you have the ordinary instruments of the planetary body. But there are other instruments that don't exist yet. In the 60s and 70s following World War II, in Western Europe and America they created the Concorde and also the Apollo space program. These machines required incredible effort from the engineers involved. There was a whole production chain. It wasn't just the end product, but there was universities, engineering chains, lineages, buildings, manufacturing equipment, smelting equipment. And the entire tool chain would have to be recreated if you wanted to remake those products today. It was, in other words, a line of work, an octave involving many people. None of that exists anymore. Today, people make drones that go into space, that do everything themselves with computers in a simple way, and the value is much less. The value is always in terms of the refined knowledge and intelligence that has developed in the people involved. Driving nearby on the weekend, I saw many new buildings that are going up to house the invading hordes that are killing Britain. They are made with spray-on concrete, and onto the facing it's stuck on imitation bricks, and instead of wood they use plastic. And politicians say, look, we're building back better, but they're not building anything, because anything of quality requires great effort and craftsmanship to make. Gurdjieff said in a traditional society, a real society, everything that is done is an instrument of knowledge. Every building and every building technique, every material that is used is an instrument of knowledge. It reflects the cosmic laws in the structure and traditions of a society. This week the Emperor of Japan was in England, being wined and dined by King Charles. Why? Why, I believe, is because this year the Japanese finally crumbled. They are the tightest and most pure ethno-state on the planet. But the globalists have made them cave in and start taking in millions of immigrants. And so the Emperor of Japan is rewarded for beginning the destruction of his own people. Such is this planet and these people. Globalization is the process of destroying cultures, races, and people in order to liquidate their money and give it to a few American billionaires. When I was still young, there were no billionaires at all. Now let's talk about some of the mistakes Gurdjieff made. Here he says, abnormalities in the working of the sex center require special study. In the first place, it must be noted that normally in the sex center, as well as in the higher emotional and the higher thinking centers, there is no negative side. In all the other centers, except the higher ones, in the thinking, in the emotional, in the moving, in the instinctive, in all of them there are, so to speak, two halves, the positive and the negative, affirmation and negation, or yes and no, in the thinking center, the pleasant and unpleasant sensations in the moving and instinctive centers. But this section is in search of the miraculous, and here Gurdjieff quite clearly says that there are two halves to the emotional center. You may wonder why then most of the groups who have studied the material since Gurdjieff and Ouspensky died have come to the conclusion that there is no negative part to the emotional center. I don't know what the answer to that is. Maybe they're all fucking idiots. Gurdjieff didn't make any mistakes. Growing up in a different era, an era where there was a lot of psychological work that I did, and also there was an influx of Eastern teachings, yoga and Tai Chi, Bruce Lee. I've seen things maybe Gurdjieff hadn't seen. I don't think Gurdjieff ever went to a biodanza workshop. But you cannot say he made any mistakes, since he was psychopathically inclined to wait up all night until he got it right. Not many people are like him. Let's return then to the laboratory of Gornahoor. One end of this astonishing connector was fitted in a certain way, also by means of appliances present on the helmets, to our temples, while the other end was joined to what is called the anscommutator, which in its turn was joined in a certain way by means of what are called wires to all the objects within the Hurhaha, as well as with those outside, namely with those objects whose visibility was needed during the experiments. It is very interesting to notice here that to each end of that artificial appliance, in their turn, two independent connectors also of wire were led, through which what are called special magnetic currents flowed from outside. As it was afterwards explained to me in detail, these connectors and the said special magnetic current had, it seems, been created by that truly great scientist Gornahoor in order that, in the case of learned three-centered beings not perfected even to the sacred Inkosano, thanks to one property of the magnetic current, their own presence might be reflected for their own essence, and thanks to another property of the magnetic current, there might be reflected the presence of the mentioned objects, and so that thereby the perception of the reality of the said objects might be realized by their imperfect organs of being sight also, in a vacuum containing none of those factors or those results of various cosmic concentrations which have received such vibrations, from the realization of which alone the functioning of any being organ whatever is possible. Having fitted upon us the said very heavy artificial appliances for enabling beings to exist in a sphere not proper to them, the assistance of this then still great all-universal scientist Gornahoor, with the help once again of special appliances, carried us into the itself, and having screwed up all the free ends of the artificial connectors projecting from us to the corresponding apparatuses present in the itself, went out, hermetically closing behind them the only way by which it was still possible, if at all, to have any communication with what is called the from everything one representing world. When we were alone in the itself, Gornahoor, after shifting one of the so-called contacts present in that strange artifact, said, "The work of the pump has already begun, and soon it will have pumped out all without exception of the results present here, of those cosmic processes whatever they may be, the totality of whose results is the basis and significance, as well as the process itself, of the maintenance of the existing of everything existing in the world, in the whole of this from everything one representing world." And he added in a half-sarcastic tone, "Soon we shall be absolutely isolated from everything existing and functioning in the whole of the universe. But, on the other hand, owing firstly to my new invention, and secondly to the knowledge we have previously obtained from ourselves, we have not only now the possibility of returning to the said world to become again a particle of all that exists, but also we shall soon be worthy to become non-participating eye-witnesses of certain of those world laws, which for ordinary, uninitiated three-scented beings are what they call the great inscrutable mysteries of nature, but which in reality are only natural and very simple, one from the other automatically flowing results. Although I personally, as a three-brained being also on account solely of certain quite particular reasons, had occasion many times before to be in atmosphereless space, and had to exist sometimes for a long time by means of the sacred crembula zumara alone, although from frequent repetition a habit had been acquired in my presence of moving from one sphere to another gradually, and almost without feeling any inconvenience from the change in the presences of the second being food, occurring with the change of the presences of cosmic substances undergoing transformation, and which are always around both large and small cosmic concentrations, although the causes themselves of my arising and the subsequent process of my being existence were arranged in an entirely special way, in consequence of which the various being functions contained within my general presence had perforce gradually become also special. Nevertheless, in spite of it all, the pumping out of the atmosphere by the said pump preceding them with such force, that such sensations were impressed on the separate parts of the whole of my presence, that even today I can very clearly experience the process of the flow of my then state and relate it to you almost in detail. The extremely strange state began in me shortly after Gornahoor had spoken in a half-sarcastic tone about our prospective situation. First, in all my three being centers, namely, in the three centers usually localized in the presence of every three-centered being, which exist under the names of the centers of thinking, feeling, and moving, in each of them separately and independently I had very definite impressions, in a very strange and unusual way, that there was taking place in separate parts of my whole planetary body, an independent process of the sacred Rasguano, and that the cosmic crystallizations composing these presences were again dissolved into the void. At first, what is called the initiative of ascertaining proceeded in the usual way, that is, according to what is called the centre of gravity of associative experiencing. But later, as my said initiative of ascertaining of everything proceeding in me gradually and almost imperceptibly became the function of my essence alone, my essence not only became the unique, all-embracing initiator of everything proceeding in me, but everything without exception of that which newly proceeded began to be perceived by and fixed in my essence alone. From the moment that my essence began to perceive impressions directly, and to ascertain independently that from what was proceeding, there was being entirely destroyed, as it were, in my general presence, first the parts of my planetary body, and then little by little the localizations of the second and third being centers also. At the same time, the ascertainment was definitely made that the functioning of these latter centers passed gradually to my thinking center, and became proper to it, with the consequence that the thinking center, with the increasing intensity of its functioning, finally became the unique powering perceiver of everything realized outside of itself, and the autonomous initiator of the ascertaining of everything proceeding in the whole of my presence as well as outside of it. I won't try to explain it fully, but one of the things that I notice is that on days when there is no sunlight, I have to function in a different way, providing more energy from within myself. And the second is that one day the context that we exist in will be washed away, and our souls will not exist within the human structure. They will exist in a different structure. But to see that is a subtle knowledge that requires higher intelligence. An existence puts us in a context where we are needed. So if you would like to be needed in a context of a higher intelligence, where the world is a nicer place to be, then you have to develop a higher intelligence here, using whatever is available. Our perceptions of the world through our centers come then, according to Beelzebub, through the reception and emission of vibrations in the centers, like living currents that pass from centers of gravity. And this is from a meeting that Gurdjieff held. Mr. Gurdjieff kindly invited him to stand. Still trembling, the man continued, "Sir, you have shaken my inner world. My opinions, my points of view are crumbling. Soon there will be nothing left of my long-standing convictions. I feel lost, and dread the prospect of the unhappiness and suffering that await me. Is the ground that I once felt so solid under my feet going to give way completely? Why," he added almost accusingly, "do you deprive me and the others of our moral and psychic equilibrium?" Everyone had become more and more attentive. The intense silence demanded a response from Mr. Gurdjieff. He seemed to have expected just such a reaction, and one could even detect a hint of satisfaction on his face. "Your fear and anxiety are not without reason," he replied. "This means that these new ideas have penetrated into your subconscious more rapidly than the intellectual knowledge needed for understanding man's situation in the world. No one can live without believing in something. Therefore, each of us believes in the solidity of the ground beneath his feet. Some believe in it only up to a certain age, but most believe in it until they die. You must understand that there is no balance in you, that you lack moral and psychic stability, and that this is due to a misunderstanding of the spiritual world. Only he who is convinced that he is heading directly over a precipice towards annihilation understands the vital necessity of following a path that leads somewhere. I know this path. It is very difficult, but it can prevent the weeping and gnashing of teeth. Of course, what we are speaking about can at first provoke fear, but while it is true that this fear can be very strong, it is not a fear that comes from our essential being. This fear comes from everything that must be abandoned, everything that wants to cling to automatic habits. It is these false eyes living in us that feel threatened when we awaken to reality, and the fear that takes hold of these eyes evokes the impulse to flee anything that could draw this reality nearer. You say that you anticipate unhappiness and suffering. Nothing could be closer to the truth. Happy is he who knows nothing of his situation. Equally happy is he who is on the path of his spiritual evolution. But unhappy is he who has recognized only a few fundamental truths, that is, he who has only a germ of consciousness. For this man, consciousness is the cause of remorse. It does not yet prevent suffering. It is comfortable to sit on a stool or a bench, but is still more comfortable to sit in an armchair. But woe to him who, having got up from his bench, hasn't yet reached the armchair. Countless torments await him. To be a raven is fine, but of course the peacock is more admired and much better treated. But sad is the lot of the raven whose plumage has been adorned with 1 or 2 peacock feathers. At the end of the worlds, all things sleep. He alone is awake in eternity. O my soul, remember past strivings, remember. O my soul, remember.